Little Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
Okay, so today we're back with Sarah, the artist behind Baleada Queen, and today the topic we're going to be covering is mental health. So that's a pretty big umbrella, and the way I see it is we'll be talking about, for me, kind of like the expectations and interpretations of what mental health can mean and how people react to it, and then specifically we're going to kind of get into the artist's experience with her diagnosis of being bipolar. So, Sarah, you off air kind of told me your kind of history of understanding your own situation. So, to try to catch other people quickly up, you had an official diagnosis at the age of 27. You kind of, in your own head, recognized some symptoms experiencing around being 18 and 19. And so, would you kind of explain, like, is that accurate, and do you have like a like a sort of way of coming to terms with your diagnosis?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that's accurate. Bipolar disorder, it can manifest earlier, but like typically it does tend to manifest around 18 or 19, which is what happened to me. I didn't understand what was happening to me at all at the time. And then it continued to sort of plague me throughout all of undergrad. It really affected my grades, it affected my work and my attendance. And then getting out of school and living in the real world, I was like married at the time, and I sort of blamed all of my unhappiness and what was going on with me on the marriage, which is like really terrible. But when you don't understand, you think it's your own circumstances as opposed to something chemical going on with you. And then, like because of that, I decided to leave my partner and move to New York. And right before I moved to New York, I had a severe manic episode, which was the first like undeniable manic episode I had ever had. And if it weren't for that, I would have never gotten properly diagnosed. I had been diagnosed as like with major depressive disorder like all throughout my 20s. And something really interesting about bipolar disorder is that most typical antidepressants don't work for bipolar disorder, and they tend to make things worse. So that's what was happening to me, is that I was being put on medication that like didn't just not help me, but kind of made my situation a lot worse. And so I got that diagnosis, and it was like this huge burden was being lifted off of me because suddenly, and I remember somebody had suggested in a really negative and nasty way that I was bipolar in the past when I was a lot younger, and it really offended me, and it made me feel very like averse to the idea of being bipolar. But when my therapist helped me reach that diagnosis and she explained everything to me, I was like, oh, yes, this is what's going on with me. And I felt so strangely positive about it because I was like, oh, I'm not a terrible person. I like have a legitimate reason for like being a certain way or dealing with anger issues or, like even looking back on being in school, like I would never name names of professors who were like this, but a lot of professors were really, really mean to me and weren't very empathetic at all when it came to like me being like, hey, I know I missed your class, but I like literally physically couldn't get out of bed today. I don't understand why, but I couldn't get out of bed. And instead of like, it baffles me as to like, I don't understand why no one picked up on the fact that what was happening to me wasn't normal. And I don't understand why professors that I worked closely with weren't like, hey, maybe you should get some help. This isn't normal. But whatever. I mean, that's not their responsibility. They're not babysitters. Anyway,
Well, I have a quick reaction to that, just to say that
yeah.
I think in general I'm kind of unsatisfied with certain like ways that higher education are going, where like the concept of like I'm going to be teaching to the 10% of the class, and if you get left behind, you get to wash out, versus that it's supposed to be fostering education. So like in general, I feel like that's something that would be nicer if
Yeah.
they were more of, on your side, as opposed to this contentious, like, put up or shut up kind of attitude.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
And in terms of some of the other things you touched on, I think when it comes to being bipolar, one of the obstacles is, like you said, that you didn't really get a great diagnosis or a useful diagnosis till you had like a low point. So do you think of that as being like a blessing in disguise? Like when people say like, the good news is I had a small heart attack because now I know to, take aspirin and change my diet, because I would die if it was just the big one.
Yeah, I mean, you say it was a low point, and it was a low point, but at the same time, it was a super high point because it was mania. So, like, I was flying. Like, it was the best time of my life and the worst time of my life at the same time. Um, some things that happen during mania are like, you get psychosis. So, like, I believed I was a witch, and I thought I was like amazing. Like, it was the coolest thing in the world, and like, I wound up like kind of stalking this guy, not really stalking him, but sort of like text harassing him because there was this other guy talking to me who I had met. I had met both of them off of OkCupid, and this other guy talking to me kept saying really similar things. So I thought that they were the same person. Really hard to explain, but when you're manic, that's what happens. And I like spent a lot of money that I didn't have, but that was really fun. I just had a great time. But I am so thankful that it happened. It is sort of like what you're saying, where it's like, I'm glad I got the small heart attack because now I'm aware of this bigger problem. And really, like, at the end of the day, like, I did a lot of embarrassing stuff. Like, I put a lot of embarrassing stuff on Facebook and on Instagram and all this, like, other social media platforms. And I sort of wish I could take it back. But at the same time, I have no regrets because without that, I wouldn't be in the position I am in today. I don't know if I ever would have been diagnosed properly.
Well, speaking of diagnoses, I think from my own experience with other friends who've had bipolar diagnoses, that I think the public, beyond just being helpful, like there's a lot of like lack of understanding. So, for instance, we can kind of dissect the fact that being bipolar is not the same as being schizophrenic, right?
Hmm.
And that, like, for you, what does being bipolar mean? Is that a daily struggle? Are there days that you forget that you even have something to worry about? Like, what is that like for you personally?
Well, now I'm on like this perfect cocktail of medications that make me really serene and focused and content, none of which you could use to describe me prior to like being on these medications. Um, so before I found like the right medications to be on, it was something that I could never forget. Even before I knew what I had, my mental illness dominated my life. And it's because it would genuinely affect my ability to function properly. And there was never a day that went by that I didn't remember that I had something wrong with me. Um, Being bipolar to me, I think, is sort of a blessing and a curse because you experience the lowest of lows, but when you experience the highs, they're like really incredible. Like, as embarrassing as it was to be that manic, in the situation I was describing earlier, it was the best feeling in the world. Like, there's no drug that could make you feel that good. And the amount of creative stuff that I accomplished during that time was amazing. And I've never been as prolific as I was then. And so being bipolar to me is getting to experience extremes. Being bipolar and being medicated means that you're an incredibly empathetic person and you have a certain understanding of like the the ebb and flow of emotions that I think other people just don't have insight into a lot of times. So it's an interesting, I mean, I don't feel sad about being bipolar. I feel kind of lucky in a weird way.
Well, if I can kind of play devil's advocate for you, I
Yeah.
think that in America there is like this issue where they do want to be supportive and they think they should be supportive, but sometimes they don't realize that they're only trying to foster the kind of recovery that they recognize. So
Oh, yeah.
to take it outside of yourself, I think I've heard from a lot of people that I've worked with was that, you know, if you're a cancer patient, you know, there's like sympathy, like that you're undergoing chemo, and that it's like they understand, oh, you know, you're wearing a hat because you're losing your hair. But if you're smiling and you're given like the sad thumbs up, then like they have all the time in the world for you. But if you like feel like you can't get out of bed, then like they can't relate. It's like
Oh,
they only want to see like the kind of positive like linear recovery. They don't understand that there could be troughs, there could be like crests, there could be, you know, sometimes it could look like it's going two steps backwards. Has that been your experience, or do you have a reaction to that?
100%. That's been my experience. It's so true. And when you can't get out of bed, like when you're smiling, like you said, and everything's good, you get a lot of sympathy and everybody's like, "You're working so hard. You're doing great," et cetera, et cetera. But when you have your low moments and you can't get out of bed or whatever, it's no longer your bipolar disorder. Like there's something wrong with you. Because there is this really pervasive attitude in a lot of cultures, but I can like mostly speak to North American culture because that's, you know, where I have the most experience dealing with my own like mental health issues. But like there's this idea, like have you ever seen this meme? It like really pisses me off so much. There's this meme of like a hand with a bunch of pills in it and then like a picture of a forest and like right under the hand with the pills it's like this isn't medicine, and then it shows the forest and it's like this is, or it's like this isn't an antidepressant but this is, like referring to the forest. And i
Yeah, I hate that too.
I hate that so much. But it's really common. And even like I feel like bipolar, well, I think what people don't realize is that like using words like saying things like, oh, he's schizo, or like, oh, she's totally bipolar, or like, he's crazy, are really ableist terms. And like, I think people kind of underestimate like how ableist our society is, even though we're starting to become more aware of stuff. And when it comes to like really overt things, my brother's my brother's in a wheelchair, you know, uh, people people are still super insensitive to it because they just are ignorant and they don't know how to deal with it. But they're like a little more aware of it because it's this outward, super apparent disability. But when it comes to these like silent disabilities and not just mental disorders, but like even something like fibromyalgia, which is like this invisible illness, people are a lot less sensitive, and that's ableism. It is. I mean, I've been filling out job applications to try and get something arranged for when I come back to New York in a month. And a lot of them are like, do you have a disability? And being bipolar is one of the things in the list that's included. And you have to say, like, yes, you have a disability if you have bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, or other things that get lumped together with bipolar disorder. But I kind of forgot what I was going to say.
No, I think, you know, we're having a good free flowing, you know, stream of consciousness on this subject because once again to take it out of just like your little experience, I've had on a way lesser level of like I've struggled with like stress induced asthma,
Oh,
and
yeah.
even though that is completely divorced from like a mental aspect, there is this thing of like people just not understanding that it's like just tough it out. Like they don't
Yeah.
understand that it's not about being tough. It's a matter of like
Yeah.
your body can't do something. And so I think
Yeah.
that is a big part of the undercurrent of all sorts of health in America, of the thinking that it's like you're responsible or it's like your fault for something that is completely out of your control. And in terms of being ableist, one of the things that I remember from like psychology that really like stuck with me, I don't know if it's just a kind of like personal optimism about it or if it actually means anything, but there was this sort of dichotomy talking about alcoholism in German versus English, and that
Hmm.
theoretically they don't say someone's an alcoholic, they say they are suffering from alcoholism, and that is a way of like making it less sort of finger pointing. That
Hmm.
it's sort of like it means the same thing, but by using that like verbal structure, it divorces the concept of like that this is something you are as a kind of person as opposed to just you are a person and then this thing is separate from you.
Yeah.
Because like you said that especially with bipolar, there's this like people throw that a word around very easily, maybe not having any sort of understanding of what that even means, right?
Yeah, I mean, and yes, and I think that that attitude and people throwing around the word bipolar prevented me from being diagnosed earlier. I really do because like I mentioned before, somebody suggested that I was bipolar in this like not very good situation in a very negative way, and I think they were pretty ignorant about like what bipolar disorder really means. They just happened to be right. Like and that really pushed me away from going to psychiatrists and getting like proper diagnosis. I was just like, screw all mental health stuff. Like there's something like I can fix this on my own. And and something that really bothers me is that like when people accuse other people of being bipolar, a lot of times it's because they like change their mind or they're really sensitive, like change their mind quickly, or they're really sensitive, or maybe they're like easily irritated. And that's like not what being bipolar is at all. Like when you have your ups and downs, it's for days at a time. It's not like a cycle of ups and downs during one day. And that really bothers me because I'm like, they're probably just moody or you're irritating them. And that's why you think they're bipolar. I
Right.
don't know.
And no, and I think like I've talked to other artists who have had this experience where like you're making artwork and someone says, "Oh, that's really great. I couldn't do that." Or they have these kind of weird like they put these things on you like you're supposed to be some sort of like cheerleader for them or like an ambassador to art.
Uh
And
huh.
I think mental health can be that way too, where it's like why is it on the person if you shared a diagnosis with someone, why should it be on you to then have to go and explain it all to them too? Like it's hard enough to just share that, like, right? That must
Yeah.
be tiring that it's like, well, I'm sharing some with you, now you go Google. Like why do I have to also be like a mental health advocate for like the education you didn't get? Has that been taxing? Like try to even educate like friends and family or people as it comes up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to try and do it, like to loved ones especially, but it is really taxing. And, I would never liken my experience to that of a person of color or a trans person. But my friends who are POC and my friends who are trans have a similar struggle where, you know, suddenly they have to explain like why like what it means to be trans and like what like why you know why they are trans and like why let's say a trans woman like why a trans woman is actually a woman and not somebody who has decided to be a woman, things like that. Or like uh my friends who are POC, it's taxing on them to like have to explain why something may be racist to somebody, or like why that's a like why that's cultural appropriation. And again, like my situation doesn't compare at all, but I have a great deal of sympathy for my friends who are in that position because I can kind of understand, like to a very small degree, what that's like. And I mean, I think people with other disabilities have to do that too. It's really strange, like people who don't have like any sort of like sense of otherness to them really have a hard time understanding anything different from what they are.
Right. And it's also just about the person because you say that like you're happy to help explain. Other people might not be, that they don't necessarily have to be, right? Um,
Yeah.
So like rather than say that like you're going to give like tips for like other people to deal with things, I'm just wondering for you and your experience, if you knew then what you know now, how do you think you would have done like school differently, or how do you think you would have like changed like your lifestyle to help you yourself enjoy your life more?
Well, I would have immediately run to the neuropsychiatrist and like tried out as many medications as I could have, like to treat like what's going on, because I can say like 100% being on the right medication has helped my ability to function so much, like so significantly. So that's the first thing I would have done. Secondly, I would have gone to disabilities at the university, which I don't think, like in my experience, not in my experience, but in my friends' experience, they're not like the most helpful. But at least it would be on record that I had a disability, and like the professor would have to acknowledge that. And then I would explain myself to them. I would be like, listen, you know, this isn't me being lazy. This is a real problem that I have. Even though I have an inkling that like a lot of those professors probably would be like, well, maybe you shouldn't be in school right now or something to that extent. But still, I think for my own sake, being able to defend myself would have helped me significantly just in the way that I felt at school, because I felt really, I don't know, like I think I did really good work, but I felt really like outcast and hated like by all my professors the entire time I was there. So just being able to like defend myself a little bit, even if it fell on deaf ears, would have helped me significantly. So
Yeah,
that's my advice.
and not to make it into too neat of a soundbite, but I think there is in general useful encouragement to say that you almost will never regret getting screenings or getting, checkups or,
Yeah.
like in general, it's like maybe you're feeling lazy and you're like, I don't want to take a shower. But once you do, you almost never like, man, I wasted that time taking a shower, you know? And
Yeah.
I think of that as similar, that it's like, you hear 100 stories of someone saying like it would have been so easy if I had gotten like a mammogram or if I had just gotten my blood pressure checked, or it would have been like 15 minutes at some one point in my life, but now like I'm feeling repercussions. So I think that is like something I hear more and more and more, is that you never will regret like checking in and getting checkups and screenings and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Although like I've mentioned that before, and I've had people reassure me that, like timing is everything. And if I had gotten diagnosed sooner, like who knows where I would be, and I'd probably be really happy, but I'm really happy now, So I don't necessarily like have any anger about not getting diagnosed sooner, but if I could change the past, I would 100% go and get checked out. There's no hesitation, like, and there's no regret. Like, I would advise everybody, if they have any sort of suspicion of something going on, to go find a psychiatrist. And to remember, and this is so important, to remember that like there's not, like, you should not be afraid of medication. And also, if like the first thing that you try is probably not going to be the right thing for you. It takes a lot of tries and a lot of patience, but you will find something. And so go get diagnosed, and then just hang in there until you find the right thing for you.
Right. And so I think that's can't be under explained, that if you haven't had that experience, you might not realize how like being on a certain medication, even if it's, a step forward, it might not be perfect the first time out. That
Yeah.
like you might need to adjust dosage, or that maybe something will change in your lifestyle or diet that maybe will affect it. Um,
Mhm.
and so like I think I always try to like talk about stuff outside of the specific context, so it's a little easier for like people who haven't had a specific experience to experience it. And so like I think of it as like birth control is a metaphor, where that's a little less stigmatized, still
Yeah.
stigmatized by some parts of America, but that like that like one what happens to one person with their hormones could be completely different than the next person, right? And so like
Yeah.
it's people will adjust, people will change that, the circumstances might change, and that's part of the process, right? That it's not just a turnkey solution, now we're done, it's a cure. It's an ongoing conversation, right?
Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. And you can even be on stuff that makes you feel worse. It happens. Like I was put on something called Seroquel, which, my uncle is bipolar and he was like suicidal and Seroquel saved his life and he's all the better for it. But I was on Seroquel and it actually made me suicidal. So, it's like you said, it's not a one size fits all. There's no immediate cure. It's so specific to your body chemistry and what you eat and all sorts of things.
Now, like, so having undergone your particular experience, obviously, I think no matter what happens to you, you're going to have more sensitivity to that specific thing. Has it changed like your relationships with other people? Like, has it made you more likely to encourage other people, like with mental health issues? Like, has that changed in a way that you've noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a lot more patience for people with mental health issues too. Like, I think at some point in my life, I probably did subscribe to like the very popular mentality that like you can fix it yourself, you know, like which we've already kind of talked about briefly. But now I'm like, no, I get it. And I really try to encourage people a lot, especially when it comes to like the medication part that we've just discussed. I really try to encourage people to have a great deal of patience and to be easy on themselves because it's really easy to beat yourself up when you have a mental illness, especially if it's gone undiagnosed and you've had other people kind of, well, I don't shit on you for like what's going on with you. Um,
Right.
yeah.
So, like, to take things kind of full circle, we've mentioned in the previous conversation that your artwork has kind of acted as a kind of therapy. Um, do you feel like if you didn't have that, like, would you have found something else? Like, could you not even imagine what it would be like to not have your artwork to act as a kind of external therapy? Like, what does that mean for you, do you think?
I can't even imagine. Like, Baleada Queen kind of changed my life, really. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so stressed about like trying to figure out how to keep her going once I move to New York. But like, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have my art as external therapy. I really don't. And I think it's because I happen to be an artist. And so that's like, I always say that art is problem solving. Like, even if you're just doing a painting and it maybe has nothing to do with you personally, like, you're solving a problem to some degree. It's like all art is a puzzle and you have to put those pieces together and so that's my language. That's how I know how to express myself. So maybe if I were a different person, I would find a different way to like deal with things and like find something therapeutic, but I don't know. Like, I don't know what I would do without Baleada Queen.
Well, that's been like really interesting story, and I think it's a great, case study for yourself and as an artist and as someone who's overcome like a lack of diagnosis, and now like you're working through it. But I wanted to leave you with this. You can kind of choose either path. Um, would you have something that you would kind of as a kind of wish that you would want like the general public to know about like mental health or bipolar or about your situation? Or also you can also share if there's an anecdote that you remember that like someone reacting to you or you reacting to them that you think you want to share as a kind of like capper, whichever way you want to go.
Hmm. Well, explain the second part a little more.
So like I like you have a unique experience and a unique like situation. So I'm just wondering, has something come up that like no one would know, like normally understand, but it's like unique from your perspective? Like you mentioned that you had that unique situation on OkCupid where you were noticing that two people had the same conversation and you were seeing a connection where there maybe wasn't one. Has there been any other like kind of situations in that you now in retrospect kind of like attribute to something that you didn't at the time?
Yeah, I mean, something that's a really good example is, um, I told you that when I was manic, I thought I was a witch. And the reason why is because I came up, well, in thinking that I was a witch, I came up with this performance art piece called a digital spellcast where you write down, because my friend and I were talking and we were discussing how technology is sort of magic. And a text message is kind of a spell if you think about it, because you're writing something down onto a tablet, you're sending it out with the intention of getting something back. And typically it garners results, which is like how a spell works. And I was like, I'm going to do this thing called a digital spellcast. My friend and I, we worked at, embarrassingly enough, at Urban Outfitters. This is in Philadelphia on Walnut Street. And we wanted to get our shifts covered because she was having a manic episode too. It was really interesting. And so we were like texting people and not getting a response or getting shot down. And I was like, I'm going to write this spell for us to get our shifts covered for tomorrow. So I wrote it down and we both took pictures of it on our phones. And then we took it outside and we burned it. And then we went through this whole process where we sent each other the pictures we had just taken and then took screenshots of our conversation and sent each other the screenshots and then took another screenshot, sent each other that screenshot, and so on and so forth until the little image of the spell that we had taken began to look like ashes. And it worked. Like it just happened to work. At 3:33 in the morning, three different people texted us and they were like, "Yeah, we'll cover your shift." And I think that was another kind of weird parallel moment where I don't know if it was coincidence or what, but because I was so convinced I was a witch, I was like, I just cast a spell and I made this happen. I don't know if that's like an example that you're looking
No,
for.
no, that's great. And it's actually reminding me too to circle back to the other conversation about how like there's this whole thing like of Etsy witches. Have you ever heard of those?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like that kind of like it's hard to know like how tongue in cheek it is that like how seriously they take it, whether it's just kind of like novelty or like that it's like no, I'm a witch and I'm using a digital distribution method or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a better story than I could have ever hoped to get on purpose. So
Oh, cool.
thank you for sharing that. And is there anything that you'd like to plug? Like we have your website I can put in the show notes. Is there anything like hotlines or anything that you want to share?
Um, nope. I think no. Hotlines. I've never had experience with any of them. If you live in New York, there is this therapist named Hillary Glick who was my therapist, and I think she's a total lifesaver. So if you can afford her, and if she's accepting new clients, and you live in New York, look her up. Um, there's also this psychiatrist named David Gandler who is amazing. And so also if he's accepting new clients, like both of these people are really busy. But if they have spaces available, they're like two people that I would suggest going to in New York. And also I just want to remind people that in addition to like not being able to find the right medication right away, sometimes your doctor isn't the right person. So you may have to change doctors, but it's all just a part of the process and you have to be patient. And that's it, really.
Well, cool. Thanks for so much for talking with me, and I'll be sure to keep up with the Baleada Queen's next stop in New York.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Find more information at doubleprimary.com.